monarchical powers. I can do whatever I want under Article 2, says he, and then acts on that. Defies everything.
Dude, it's going to be like this every day.
Defies the law to
it's going to be like this every day.
aid from Ukraine. Defies the law in a dozen different directions. All the time. And lies about it. All the time. And says to Mr. Cipollone here to lie about it. These facts are undeniable. Undeniable.
Yeah, exactly, Katie.
Cipollone once again complained that he did not request.
I don't think anybody in here, I mean, I don't think very many people in here think that executive privilege shouldn't exist. Obviously, if there's some heavily classified information where it were to get out would hurt the national interest, I think most people agree that executive privilege has a place. Executive privilege isn't an enumerated power, correct? I think it is, right? Otherwise, it... Anyways. What people are opposed is just this blanket issue of executive privilege as a justification to completely stonewall Congress. That's not what executive privilege is.
That's the same position the Congress has taken, the same position the administration.
Yeah, it's not presidential security, it's national security. As long as it protects the national interest, then you can claim executive privilege. If it involves some source that you cultivated in the Kremlin or something like that. Obviously, that would be detrimental if something like that were to be revealed to the public. 2020.
We still don't have a decision from a final decision from the court requiring him to testify. In a couple months, it will be 1 year since we issued that subpoena. Now, the president would like nothing more than for us to have to go through 1 year or 2 year or 3 years of litigation to get in a witness to come before the House. The problem is the president is trying to cheat in this election. We don't have the luxury of waiting 1 year or 2 years or 3 years when the very object of this scheme was to cheat in the next election. It's not like that threat's gone away. Just last month, the president's lawyer was in Ukraine, still trying to smear his opponent, still trying to get Ukraine to interfere in our election. The president said even while the impeachment investigation is going on, when he was asked, what did you want? And that call was Zelensky, and the answer was, well, if we're being honest about it, Zelensky should do that investigation with the Bidens. He hasn't stopped asking them to interfere. Do the Ukrainians have any doubt about what he wants? Well, one of the witnesses, David Holmes, testified about the pressure that Ukraine feels. He made a very important point. It isn't
Allied
over.
Space under assault.
It's not like they don't want anything else from the United States.
Allied forces
This effort to
combat.
pressure Ukraine goes on to this day. With the president's lawyer continuing the scheme as we speak, with the president inviting even other nations to also involve themselves in our election. China, he wants now to investigate the Bidens. This is no intangible threat to our election. Within the last couple weeks, it's been reported that the Russians have tried to hack Burisma. Why do you think they're hacking Burisma? Because, as Chairman Nadler says, everybody seems to be interested in one company out of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian companies. Coincidence. The same company that the president has been trying to smear Joe Biden over happens to be the company that the Russians are hacking. Now, why would the Russians do that? Well, if we look back to the last election, the Russians hacked the DNC, and they started to leak campaign documents in a drip, drip, drip.
He is
And the
impeached.
president was only
I don't know what you're
happy
talking about.
over 100 times in the last couple months of the campaign to cite those Russian hack documents.
Donald J.
Now the
Trump
Russians are at it
is
again.
impeached.
This is no illusory threat to the independence of our
behind
elections.
you.
The Russians are at
They're
it
about
as
a
we
month
speak.
behind.
And what does the president do? Is he saying, back off, Russia? I'm not interested in your help. I don't want foreign interference.
No,
No, he's
that's
saying,
not what
hey,
you meant.
come on in, China.
He said he's not going to be
Allied space
impeached.
under assault.
And he's got his guy in
combat.
Ukraine continuing the scheme.
No.
We can't wait a year
Not
or
what you
2
meant.
years or 3 years like we've had to wait with Don McGahn to get John Bolton in to testify to let you know that this threat is ongoing.
Allied forces in combat. Allied
Council also
space
says, well,
under
this is just
assault.
like Obama. Right? This is just like Obama, citing, I suppose, the Fast and Furious case. They don't mention to you that in that
Here it comes.
investigation, the Obama administration turned over tens of thousands of
Allied
documents.
forces
Yup.
in combat.
They don't want you to know about that. They say it's just like
Allied
Obama. Well, when you
forces
find
in
video
combat.
of Barack Obama saying that under Article 2 he can do anything, then you can compare Barack Obama to Donald Trump.
Fair.
When you find video of Barack Obama saying, I'm going to fight all subpoenas, then you can compare Barack Obama to
Subscribe.
Donald Trump.
Fair.
Allied forces in combat.
And finally, Mr. Cipollone says, President Trump is a man of his word.
That's
Well,
fucking
it's
good.
too late in the evening for me to go
Allied
into that,
space under assault.
except to say this. President Trump gave his word he would drain the swamp. He said he would drain the swamp. And what have we seen?
Allied
We've
space
seen his
under assault.
personal lawyer go to jail. His campaign chairman go to jail.
That's not what impeachment is.
His deputy campaign chairman convicted of a different crime. His associate, Lev Parnas,
Oh,
under.
God.
The list goes on and on. That's, I guess, how you drain the swamp, is you have all your
Do you
people
believe
go
in
to jail.
QAnon, sir?
I don't
What are
think
your
that's
thoughts on
really
QAnon?
what was meant by that expression,
Allied
but for the purposes
forces
of
in
why we're here
combat.
today, how does someone who promises to drain the swamp, coerce an ally of ours into doing a political investigation? That is the swamp. That's not draining the swamp, that's security.
Sir? What are your thoughts on QAnon?
I think it is appropriate at this point for me to admonish the House managers,
What?
President to remember that they are addressing the world's greatest deliberative body. One reason it has earned that title is because its members avoid speaking in a manner and using language that is not conducive to civil discourse.
Oh, fuck off.
In the 1905 Swain trial, a senator objected when one of the managers used the word pettifogger. The presiding officer said the word had not been used. I don't think we need to aspire to that high of standard, but I do think those...
Sir, what are your thoughts on QAnon? What's your... Sorrel, what are your thoughts on QAnon? It's like the first time we've seen Roberts. Hey, what's happening? Are they taking a moment of silence? What are they doing?
Allied forces in combat. Mineral field depleted. Allied space under assault. Allied forces in combat.
Recognized?
Mr. Chief Justice, it will surprise no one that I move to table the amendment and ask for the ayes and nays.
Is there a
Allied
sufficient
space
second?
under assault.
The clerk will call the roll.
Allied forces
Alexander.
in combat.
Baldwin. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett.
Allied forces in combat.
Blackburn. Blunt. Rooker. Braun. Brown. Burr. Cantwell. Capito. Mr. Carden.
Fam,
Carper.
it's time to wrap this up, fam.
Casey.
Allied space under assault.
Cassidy.
Give it that beauty rest. Save your energy. Big day tomorrow. What time does it start tomorrow? Does anybody know?
Draper.
Where's bottom right? Oh, there he is.
Allied space. Allied forces
right.
in combat. Mineral research completed.
I just saw him.
Durbin.
There, right there. Is that what? That looks like Warren right next to me. I wonder if they kissed and made out.
Gardner.
Or is that Warren? That looks like
Gillibrand.
Warren.
Mr. Graham.
Apparently Marco Rubio is taking notes with like a quill pen.
Allied space under assault.
Ms. Hassel.
Or like a pen with like a feather on it that you have to like dip it in.
Allied
Where is Rubio?
forces in combat.
Heinrich. Roman. Mrs.
That is kind of
Heitzman.
cool, actually.
Mr.
I mean, he's a
Inhofe.
fucking tool, but
Johnson.
yeah, I support it.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. King. Klobuchar.
Rubio is such a coward.
Langford.
Wait, I don't see him. Where are you? Just
Lady.
there he is, right there, right?
Mr. Lee.
Can't see.
Mrs. Leffler.
Oh,
Mr. Martin.
that looks like him.
Mr. McConnell. Miss McSally. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski.
I think McCain would have probably voted with his party on this one.
Paul.
Maybe not.
Purdue.
Maybe. People hold him up like he was this fucking maverick, but he.
Portman.
I mean,
Mr. Reed. Red.
I think he
Roberts.
probably would have voted with his party on this one.
Mr. Romney. Mr. Rounds. Rubio.
Yeah, that's Rubio.
Sanders.
New technology
Sad.
researched.
Scott. Schumer. Mr. Scott of Florida. Mr. Scott of South Carolina. Mrs. Shaheen.
Yeah, I mean, generally terrible principles.
Mr. Shelby.
McCain was no fucking friend to the resistance.
Cinema.
A really low bar that we would use, like, opposing this president as a Republican as, like, the standards to praise.
Dune.
Oh, we're still here, buddy.
Chiller. Toomey. Udall.
Allied space under assault.
Van Hollen. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warren. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker.
If the Senate is in session, I think that you can always find a C-SPAN feed of it, if I'm not mistaken, right? It's the Senate or the House, I'm pretty sure.
Allied forces in combat.
Sure, there are some closed sessions if it's like a classified or something like that. I'm gonna be reaching there, right? Or what? Wait, what the heck? Peanuts? What is this? What is this? Peanuts, get your peanuts hit!
I'm gonna teach my life.
In the chamber who would like to change? If not, the yeas are 53 and the nays are 47.
Holy shit, who would have thought? Here it comes.
Democratic leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr.
Please, don't do it. Don't
I
do it.
send an amendment to the desk to provide for a vote of the Senate on any motion to subpoena witnesses or documents after the question period. I waive its reading.
Allied forces
The
in
objection to
combat.
the waiving of the reading?
Yeah, read it. I withdraw my waiver, request for a waiver.
Does any senator have an objection to the waiving of the reading? There is an objection. Yes. The clerk will read the amendment.
Senator from New York, Mr. Schumer, proposes an amendment number 1292. Page 3, line 8, strike 4 hours and insert 2 hours. On page 3, line 10, strike the question bar and all that follows. On page 3, line 10, after decide. On page 3, line 15, strike whether, all that follows through documents on line 17.
Allied forces in
On
combat.
page 3, line 18, strike that question and insert any such motion. On page 3, line 23 and 24, strike and
Well,
the Senate
it's not
shall
really supposed to be
decide
riveting.
after deposition of witnesses shall testify and insert and then
Supposed to be kind of boring.
in the Senate.
Shield cluster expended.
The amendment is arguable by
Allied
the parties
forces
for 2
in
hours, equally
combat.
divided. Mr. Manager,
Allied
choose the
space.
opponent or opponent.
Allied forces
Wait.
in combat.
What?
Mineral field depleted.
Mr. Schiff, you may proceed and may reserve time for rebuttal.
No, it's 2 hours
Allied
per
space
side,
under
dude.
assault. Allied forces in combat.
Oh my fuck.
Senators, this amendment makes two important changes to the
They can
McConnell
vote, but wait,
resolution.
they can vote to adjourn in the middle of this, right?
The first is
Forces in combat.
the McConnell resolution does not
It
actually
was what per
provide
side?
for an immediate vote
Allied
even later
forces
on the witnesses that were requested. What the McConnell resolution says is that at some point after essentially the trial is over, after you've had the arguments of both sides, you've had the 16 hours of questioning, then there will be a debate as to whether to have a vote and a debate on a particular witness. So there's no even guarantee you're going to get a chance to vote on specific
Allied
witnesses.
space under assault.
All the
Allied
resolution provides is
forces
you're going to get an opportunity to vote to have a debate on whether to ultimately have a vote.
Allied forces in combat.
This would strip that middle layer. It would strip the debate on whether to have a debate on a particular witness. If counsel, colleagues, the president's
There's no way they'll go past like 2 hours.
are making the point, well, you're going to get that opportunity later. The reality is under the common resolution, we will never get to have a debate about witnesses. Well, you heard the discussion of 4 witnesses. There may be others that come to the
Make
attention of
some
this
chicken
body
noodle soup.
that we
That's
should
all my
also follow.
sensitive stomach can eat right now.
But will you ever get to hear a debate about why a particular witness is necessary? Well, you may only get a debate over the debate.
Forces in combat.
And so this amendment would remove that debate over debate regarding a particular witness. The other thing that this resolution would provide is that you should hear from these witnesses directly. The McConnell resolution says they'll be deposed, and that's it.
Allied forces
It doesn't
in
say you're ever
combat.
actually going to ever
Justice
hear these
mineral
witnesses for
field
yourself.
exhausted.
Which means that you, as the triers of fact, may not get to see and witness the credibility of these witnesses. You may only get to see
Forces in combat.
a deposition or a deposition transcript or maybe a video of a deposition, I don't know. But if there's any contesting of facts, wouldn't you like to hear from the witnesses yourself? And very directly. Now, the reason why it was done this way in the Clinton case, why there were depositions, and again, in the Clinton case, all these people had been interviewed and deposed or testified before. But the reason why it was done that way in Clinton was because of the salacious nature of it. Nobody wanted witnesses on the Senate floor talking about sex. Well, as I said earlier, I can assure you that will not be the issue here. And so to whatever degree there was a reluctance in the Clinton case to have live testimony because of its salacious character, that is not an issue here. There's not a reason here not to hear from those witnesses for your side. So this resolution makes those two important changes,
Upgrade
and I would
completed.
urge your support.
Obliterate. Destroy.
Mr. Cipollone?
Eradicate. It will be.
We stand as one. Ula Sadari. Kassar de Templari.
Ally space under assault.
Ameditish Allies Holire. And Tara Tassadar. We embrace the glory of battle.
Members of the Senate. Good morning.
Considers those questions, strikes the appropriate balance in the Senate's discretion as the sole trier of impeachment. The rules in place here in the resolution are similar to the Clinton proceeding in that regard, in the sense that this body has the discretion as to whether to hear from the witness live, if there are witnesses at some point, or not. But more fundamentally, the preliminary question has to be overcome, which is they will have
Allied forces in combat.
2 hours, 4 hours total, 2 hours for them,
Expended.
to try to convince you after the parties have made their presentation, which they will have 24 hours to do, as to whether or not the preliminary question of whether it shall be in order to consider and debate any motion to subpoena witnesses or documents. That was precisely the Clinton rules. That was, or it's actually stronger than the Clinton rules, I'm sorry. And those rules, as I've indicated before, passed 100 to 0. We think that the resolution strikes the appropriate balance, and we urge that the amendment be rejected. I yield my time.
Thank you, counsel. Mr. Schiff, you have 57 minutes.
Don't worry, I won't use it. I would say only if there was any veneer left to camouflage where the President's counsel was really coming from, the veneer is completely gone now. After saying we're going to have that opportunity to have a vote on these witnesses later, now they're saying no, you're just going to have a vote on whether to debate having a vote on the witnesses. The camouflage was pretty thin to begin with, but it's completely gone now. No, what they really want is they want to get to that debate, that generic debate about whether to have a debate on witnesses, and have you vote it down so you never actually have to vote to refuse these witnesses, although you've had to do that tonight. I don't see what that purpose serves, except, I suppose, to put one more layer in the way of accountability. But the veneer is gone. All this promise about you're going to get that opportunity is just a question of when. No, the whole goal is for you never get a chance to take that vote. And what's more, the vote on this resolution is a vote that says you don't want to hear from these witnesses yourself.
You just subscribed.
You don't want to evaluate the credibility of these witnesses yourself. Maybe, just maybe, you'll let them be deposed, but you don't want to hear them yourself. You don't want to see these witnesses come in and put up their hand and take an oath. Now, I don't know what the rules of these depositions are going to be. Maybe the public isn't going to ever get to see what happens in those depositions. We released all the deposition transcripts from our depositions, those secret 100-person depositions. But we have no idea what rule they'll adopt for these depositions. Maybe the public will see them, maybe they won't, maybe you'll get to see them. I assume you'll get to see them. But at the end of the day, this is also a vote you're going to have to cast that says, no, I don't want to hear them for myself. No, I don't want to evaluate their credibility for myself. This is, after all, only a vote, only a case, only a trial about the impeachment of the President of the United States. You have a bank robbery trial? You have a trial over somebody stealing a piece of mail? You're going to get live witnesses. But an impeachment of the President of the United States? No, we don't need to see their credibility. Is that really where we are here now? Is that what the American people expect of a fair trial? I don't think it is. I yield back.
Mr. Chief Justice,
Majority Leader is recognized.
I move to table the amendment and ask for the ayes and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? If there is, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Booker.
What are you doing?
Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Braun. Mr. Brown.
What are you doing? What is
Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs.
Vote to
Capito.
table, kill Schumer,
Mr.
then have to
Cardin.
vote on witnesses and documents
Mr.
later in the
Carper.
trial?
Mr. Casey.
Okay, so they don't want witnesses.
Mr. Cassidy.
I guess we're not going to have witnesses.
Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Crapo. Mr.
Wait.
Cruz.
How is
Mr.
Romney going to
Daines.
vote on this one? This
Ms.
one
Ducker.
might not go down
Durbin.
party lines. Maybe I'm being optimistic.
Mr. Enzi. Ms. Ernst. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Gardner. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Ms. Harris. Ms. Hassan. Mr. Hawley. Mr. Heinrich. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Jones. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. King. Ms. Klobuchar.
Allied forces in combat.
Mr. Langford. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mrs. Loeffler. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Markey. Mr. McConnell. Ms. McSally. Mr. Menendez.
Allied forces in
Mr.
combat.
Merkley.
I return to serve.
Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy. Mrs. Murray.
Allied forces
Mr. Paul.
in combat.
Mr. Perdue. Mr. Peters. Mr. Portman. Mr. Reed.
Allied forces in combat.
Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts.
Allied forces in
Mr. Romney.
combat.
Ms. Rosen.
Wait, did Romney
Mr.
just vote no?
Rounds. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders.
I don't know what he said.
Mr. Sass.
He said I? What a fucking piece of
Schott.
shit.
Return to serve.
Allied forces
Schumer.
in combat.
Mr. Scott of Florida.
Allied forces
Mr.
in
Scott of
combat.
South Carolina. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Sinema. Ms. Smith. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Warner. Ms. Warren. Mr. Whitehouse.
Allied space under assault.
Mr. Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden,
Allied
Mr. Young,
forces in combat. Allies base under assault. Allied forces in combat.
Is there any senator in the chamber who would like to change his or her vote? If not, the yeas are 53, the nays Democratic leaders recognized.
Send an amendment to death to allow adequate time for written responses to any motions by the parties.
Our
And I ask
cannon
that
shall sing.
Clerk will report.
Senator from New York, Mr. Schumer, proposes an amendment number 1293 on page 2, beginning on line 10, strike 11 a.m. on Wednesday, January 22, 2020, and insert 9 a.m. on Thursday, January 23, 2020. On page 2, line 15, strike Wednesday, January 22, 2020, and insert Thursday, January 23,
Allied
2020.
forces in combat.
Amendment is arguable by the parties for 2 hours, equally divided. Manager Schiff, are you a proponent of this amendment?
We shall
Are you a proponent of
serve
this amendment?
forever.
Mr. Cipollone?
Mineral field exhausted.
Mr. Schiff, you may proceed and reserve time for rebuttal if you wish.
Army upgraded.
Does this
Thank you,
start at
Mr.
1
Chief
p.m. Eastern
Justice.
tomorrow?
This amendment is quite simple. Under the McConnell resolution, the parties file motions tomorrow at 9 a.m. Written motions, that is. And the responding party has to file their reply 2
Allied
hours later.
space under assault.
That really doesn't give anybody enough time to respond to a written motion. When the President's team filed, for example, their trial brief, it was over 100 pages. We at least had 24 hours
cluster
to file our
expended.
reply. And
9
that's all we
a.m..
would ask for. In the Clinton trial, again, if we are interested in the Clinton case,
So
they had
6 a.m.
41
my time?
hours to
No,
respond to
that
written
can't be.
motions. We're not asking for 41 hours, but we are asking
It's
for
already
enough time to
1:30
write
a.m. over
easy response to it. That's essentially it.
There's no fucking way.
And I would hope that we can agree at least on this.
Mr. Sekulow?
Allies under assault.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice, members of the Senate. So it seems like tomorrow is the day off. Is that correct, Mr. Chair? Today is tomorrow, tomorrow is today. The answer is we're ready to proceed. We will respond to any motions.
Space under
We would
assault.
ask the chamber to
Allied
reject
space under assault.
this amendment.
59 minutes remaining, Mr.
I
Schiff.
feel your presence.
Allied space under assault.
Thank you. The majority leader
Allied
is recognized.
forces
Chief
in
Justice, I
combat.
move to table the amendment.
Is there a sufficient second?
Mineral field
The clerk will
depleted.
call the roll.
Mr. Alexander,
We move unseen.
Ms. Baldwin,
Technology research.
Mr. Barrasso,
They're deliberately like stretching this
Bennett.
out into the wee hours of the night. Is that
Mrs.
what's happening?
Blackburn,
Allied forces in combat.
Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr.
Just to
Booker,
go until like 3.
Mr. Bozeman,
Upgrade completed.
Mr. Braun, Mr. Brown, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito,
I don't have the stamina.
Mr. Carden, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins,
I'm here in the shadows.
Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer,
Allied
Mr. Crapo,
forces in combat.
Mr. Cruz, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Inzi, Ms. Ernst, Mrs. Feinstein, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gardner, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Ms. Harris, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich,
Completed.
Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Height-Smith, Mr. Inhofe,
Mineral
Mr.
field
Johnson,
exhausted.
Mr. Jones,
I don't understand what the point is.
Mr.
If
Kane.
they're not calling witnesses, then
Mr. Kennedy,
how does it benefit
King.
the Republicans to stretch this out until like 3
Ms.
a.m.?
Klobuchar,
Mineral cluster
Mr. Langford,
What is the purpose of that strategy?
Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mrs. Leffler, Mr. Manchin, Mr. Markey, Mr. McConnell, Ms. McSally, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Paul, Mr. Perdue, Mr. Peters, Mr. Portman, Mr. Reed, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Romney, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds,
Allied forces
Mr. Rubio,
in combat.
Mr. Sanders, Mr. Sass, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schumer,
Allied forces in combat.
Mr. Scott of Florida,
Very well.
Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Sinema, Ms. Smith,
Allied forces in
Ms.
combat.
Stabenow,
For the reckoning,
Mr. Sullivan,
we move
Mr. Tester,
unseen.
Mr. Thune,
I serve.
Mr. Tillis, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Udall,
Completed. Very wise.
Mr. Van Hollen,
We move
Mr. Warner, Ms. Warren, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young,
in combat.
Ms. Duckworth,
It shall be mineral field depleted. Allied forces in combat. We move unseen. Allied space under assault. Stay here in the shadows. Very well. Veraku.
5248. Wait, what? Do we have a defector?
Is there any senator in the chamber who wishes to change his or her vote? If not, the yeas are 52, the nays are 48. What?
Who was it?
Democrat leader,
Chief Justice, on behalf of Senator Van Hollen, I sent this amendment to the desk to help ensure impartial justice by requiring the Chief Justice of the United States to rule on motions seeking witnesses and documents. I ask that it be read. This is our last amendment to the
in combat.
The clerk will report.
Allied forces.
Wait, was it Romney?
Senator from New York, Mr. Schumer, for Mr. Van Hollen, proposes an amendment number 1294. On page 3, line 20, insert the presiding officer shall rule to authorize the subpoena of any witness or any document that a senator or a party moves to subpoena if the presiding officer determines that the witness or document is likely to have probative evidence relevant to either article of impeachment before the Senate after order.
Allied forces in combat.
The amendment is arguable by the parties for 2 hours, equally divided. Senator Schiff, are you a proponent or opponent of the motion?
in combat.
Mr. Cipollone, are you a
Allies
proponent
base
or opponent?
under assault.
Mr. Schiff, you may proceed and reserve time for rebuttal.
Senators, this amendment would provide that the presiding officer shall rule to authorize the subpoena of any witness or any document.
Stay behind here in the shadows.
The presiding officer shall rule to authorize the subpoena of any witness or any document that a senator or a party moves to subpoena if the presiding officer determines that that witness is likely to have probative evidence relevant to either article of impeachment. It would allow the Chief Justice, it would allow senators, House managers, the President's counsel to make use of the experience of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to decide the questions
Nexus point under
of the
enemy
relevance of
attack.
witnesses.
Allied
And
forces.
either party can call the witnesses.
Allied forces. in
We can't come
combat.
to agreement on witnesses ourselves.
Are we sure that was Romney?
Arbitrator, that being the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. If the Chief Justice finds that a witness would be probative, that witness would be allowed to
Allied
testify.
space under
Chief
combat.
Justice finds their testimony would be immaterial, that witness would not be permitted to testify. Now, it still maintains the Senate tradition that if you don't agree with the Chief Justice, you can overrule him. You have the vote, you can overrule the Chief Justice and say you disagree with what
Skrzatch, thank you,
the
bud.
Chief Justice
Riser
has decided.
exhausted.
Yuri Keo, thank you.
But it would give this decision to a neutral party. That right is
Pickles.
extended to both parties.
Allied space.
It will be done in a
Mahu,
schedule that the
Vendetta,
majority
Taylor,
leader
my
has
defeat,
set out.
Iowa Husker, thank you guys.
We want.
Allied
Instead of a sense to have the trial on Saturday. Like we are, at least let's have a neutral arbiter decide.
That seems great.
As much as he may load the task, whether a witness is relevant or a witness is not. We would hope that nothing else we can agree on tonight.
Allied space.
We could agree to allow the Chief Justice to give us the benefit of his experience in deciding which witnesses are relevant to this inquiry and which witnesses are not.
Allied
And
forces
without a reserve
under
of bounds
combat.
Mr. Sekulow?
Mr. Chief Justice, members of the Senate, and with no disrespect to the Chief Justice, this is not an appellate court. This is the United States Senate. There is not an arbitration clause in the United States Constitution.
Allied forces.
The Senate shall have the sole
Allied
power to try all
space
impeachments.
under assault.
We oppose the amendment.
Jordan Sweet.
Schiff, you have 57 minutes remaining.
Allied space under assault.
Well, this is a good note to
Allied
conclude on
forces
because
in combat.
don't let it be said we haven't made progress today.
Allied
The
space
President's counsel
under
has just
assault.
acknowledged for the first time that this is not an appellate court. I'm glad we have established that. This is the
Allied
trial,
space
not the
under
impeachment.
assault.
And the trial ought to have witnesses, and the trial should be based on the cold record from the court below because there is no court below.
Allied
Because as the
forces,
counsel has
allied
just admitted,
space under
you are not the
assault.
appellate court. But I think what we've also seen here tonight
Clever.
is
Allied space
they not only
under
don't
assault.
want you to hear these witnesses, they don't
Clever
want to hear
guy.
them live, they don't want you really to hear them proposed,
Allied
they don't
space
want
under assault.
a neutral justice to weigh in. Because if the neutral justice weighs in and says, you know, it's pretty hard to argue that John Bolton's not relevant here. It's pretty hard to argue that Mitt Mulvaney's not relevant here. I just watched that videotape where he said he discussed this with the president. They're contesting it. It's pretty relevant. What about Hunter Biden? Hunter Biden's probably the real reason they don't want the Chief Justice to have a rule on the materiality of a
Allied
witness, right?
forces in combat.
What can Hunter Biden tell us about why the president withheld hundreds of millions of
assaulting
dollars from
programs.
Ukraine? I can tell you what he
Nexus
does.
point under Allied space.
What does Hunter Biden know about why the president wouldn't meet with President Zelensky?
Be as you say.
He can't tell us anything about it.
Nexus point under enemy.
What can he tell us
Allied
about these
space
Defense
under
Department
assault.
documents or OMB
Allied
documents?
space under
What can he tell us
assault.
about the violation of the law on withholding his money? Of course, he can't tell us anything about that. Because his testimony is immaterial and irrelevant. The only purpose in calling him
Nexus point
is
under
to
Allied
succeed
space
in what they
under
failed to do
assault.
earlier in this whole scheme, and that is to spear Joe Biden by going after his son.
I am the voice.
We trust the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to make that decision, that he's not a material witness. This isn't like fantasy football here. We're not making trades, or we shouldn't be. We're trading one completely irrelevant and material witness that allows us to spear the president's opponent in exchange for the ones that are really relevant, that we should hear.
Allied forces pylon combat under Allied space under assault.
If you can't trust the Chief Justice
Allied forces in
appointed by a
combat.
Republican president to make
Pylon
fair
under
decision
assault.
about materiality, I think it betrays the weakness of your case.
Allied
Look, I'll be
space
honest,
under
there's
assault.
been some apprehension on our side about this idea,
Nexus point under enemy attack.
but we have confidence in Chief Justice to make a fair and impartial decision. And it's something that colleagues representing the president don't.
Unseen.
They don't.
It shall be as you
They
say.
don't want a fair disagreement about this. They don't even want one that you could overturn.
Good pickles. Did I get you, bud? Thank you.
Because they don't want a fair trial. So we end where we started. With one party wanting a fair trial. One party that doesn't. One party that doesn't fear a fair trial. And one
Allied
party that is
forces
terrified of a fair trial. Majority leader.
I make a motion to table the amendment and ask for the ayes or noes.
Mr. Alexander. Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Booker. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Braun. Mr. Brown. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito. Mr. Carter. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Daines. Ms. Duckworth. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi. Ms. Ernst. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Gardner. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Ms. Harris. Ms.
Allied
Hassan.
space under assault.
Mr. Hawley. Mr. Heinrich. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Jones. Mr. Kane. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. King. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Lankford. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee.